Well, welcome to Moore College. My name is Jane Tooher. I serve on the faculty here where I teach in ministry and church history, and I'm the director of the Priscilla and Aquila Centre. 2 weeks ago, the Priscilla and Aquila Centre had a seminar on God's wisdom for dating. And this session now is a follow-up session where we're going to go through a lot of people's questions because there's just so many questions from that seminar. My colleague, Paul Grimmond, who's the Dean of Students and lectures in ministry, gave that talk and he's with me now. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Jane. It's great to be here.
So we're going to kick it off. And if you haven't watched that talk, it would be a good idea to watch that talk first, maybe. I mean, you can watch this independently of that, but that's a great resource if you haven't watched that. Also, it may be that you submitted a question and we're not going to answer it now because we think it was covered in the talk. So it might be that you want to re-listen to the talk as well. Okay, so let's kick off the questions, Paul.
Great.
Okay, so why is dating a good thing rather than just get married?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think one of the things that I'd probably want to clarify a little bit from the talk was just the idea that I think biblically, there's kind of the picture is marriage. The Bible doesn't say a whole lot about how you go from single to married. And I'm saying that we have some freedom as Christians about how we kind of navigate that space. Um, and that's going to be shaped a bit culturally, I think. So if you'd come from a culture where, there's arranged marriage, that might look very different. But for us culturally, I don't think any of us are going to kind of leap into the arranged marriage stage. And so somehow or another, you have to get to know someone well enough to work out whether you're going to make this kind of commitment. And so what I'm saying is that dating is just a way of saying we're going to get to know each other in a particular way as we're thinking together about whether or not marriage might be part of our future.
Yeah, okay. So, why is the Christian dating experience so different to the view of many in our society? And the question follows up with, why is the Christian view so frowned upon? Shouldn't dating be the same for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? If God had delivered us a kind of way of dating, and there are kind of 5 chapters in the Bible that describe that, whatever, in a sense, you could talk about that reality. But I think the reason that it's so different is that it's really grasping the fact that Jesus comes into the world and says, um, "I am from the Father. I'm from the God who made you." And I'm going to talk to you about what's good and wise and right for you as a way to live under God as your Father. And we know from the Bible that our natural state as human beings, as sinful people, is just we live in such rejection of God that we like to create kind of our own space, our own way of doing things. And lots of what our world does in particular spaces is really driven by a rejection of God and a desire to pursue our own goals. Whereas Christianly, we want to say, no, the God who made the world has really healthy things to say to us about how to live. And so listening to his wisdom is going to, I think, create a radically different picture at this point. And in the talk, we talked a little bit about some of the contexts, the cultural context that we currently live in, which I think are all symptoms of people running away from God rather than running towards him.
Yeah, so some things will be similar, but because the world is ultimately against God, there's going to be some major differences because,
Radical differences, I would
radical
expect.
differences.
Yeah.
Okay, so following on from that, how do you explain to a non Christian the reason why you decide not to move in with your partner until marriage, other than to avoid temptations? Is it not good to see also? Is it not good to also see compatibility with living with each other before marriage? So, yeah, those sort of arguments.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think I would want to say, uh, I think perhaps we need to be less embarrassed about saying that our sexual purity really matters to God and really should matter to us. So God says that there's this part of us, and I talked in the talk about how deeply intimate and personal, particularly how we're made as sexual beings and how close that is to our sense of identity and other things. And the Bible says that that's actually such a precious and important gift that you should use it within the space of a relationship that's already been kind of looked after and cared for. I think one of the things that marriage does as you make promises to each other is it makes a secure space where you can open up, reveal those intimate parts, think deeply about how you relate in that space. And there's a security and protection around the way that we relate in all of those things. So I'd want to say that I think, Christianly, it looks so different because we have a radically different view of sex and sexuality and how that fits, and the importance of marriage is a really safe place for that to be kind of played out. So, how do we talk to our friends about that? I mean, I think we want to say at one level, um, you know, we believe that there's a God who made the world and that the Bible tells us some things about how to live in God's world that are so much better for us than just the way that you might want to live. And so, like, I think there's been incredible damage that we do to each other in terms of the way that the world's handled sex and sexuality. We talked in the talk a little bit about pornography, but I do think that we live in a world that's depersonalized sexual activity and virtualized it. It's made it a kind of a non-bodily, a non-physical experience. Like, actually, all of those things, if you stop and think about them, are a radical departure from who we are and how we function in the world. And there's lots of signs, even at the level of, as we do research in social media. I mean, just recently, all of this stuff has come out in the Wall Street Journal in the last couple of weeks about the way that Facebook has been hiding information about what it knows is the impact of things like social media on young teenage women, particularly. And so we have this view, everything goes, and we say, well, that's good for everybody. But I just don't think that it is good for everybody. And so I think we want to say God's way is good. God tells us that sex should be protected within the bond of marriage. And that's a good thing. So I'm not going to choose to move in because. So there was a question then about
Yeah,
compatibility.
yeah, yeah.
I think in the end, uh, you get to know somebody well, not by living with them, but by doing, sharing life and fellowship and friendship with them, and getting to know them to the point where you make that kind of commitment. Um, and again, I think the Bible says protect sex and that level of commitment for the space where you've made promises to each other. And I think that that's a really good thing. And for people that I know who've chosen to go that direction, there's a real delight
Yeah.
and security in
Yeah.
that place. Yeah.
So someone might be feeling quite scared about, oh, are we going to actually end up being compatible once we get married? But it's ultimately need to trust that person as well, don't you? And actually getting to know each other in the
Yeah.
dating
I mean, it's
experience as
interesting.
well.
There are lots of questions about that in some
Yeah.
level or another. Like, how do I know whether they're the
Yeah.
one, and et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think I want to say, um, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? At one level, you never fully know another human being. Like when you stop and think about how much goes on in your own mind that you don't speak or say or communicate to another person and vice versa. And yet God's made the world in such a way that as I do life with the people around about me, the way that they behave shows me things about what they think. And over time, as we learn to relate to one another, I get a sense of whether we can communicate when things are difficult. I get to work out whether when you're upset, do you handle that with wisdom and grace and godliness? Does your temper get out of control? All those things that are going to be deeply significant long term, I think we work out as we do relationship with one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This question is, why has dating changed? So I guess in terms of in the Western world anyway, is the concept of dating now actually what God wants?
Yeah, I mean that's a funny question, isn't it? If you look through history, and I even think biblical history, people have gotten married for lots of reasons,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes it was to cement family ties, sometimes it's for economic reasons, sometimes it's for security and protection reasons. Like different people in different cultures at different times have gotten married for all sorts of different reasons. Actually, as you look around the world, different cultures have had different ways of introducing people to each other and all that kind of stuff. I don't think the Bible anywhere specifies how your parents must get together with their parents and have a conversation and decide on the bride price or. So there's so many things for all of us that are culturally tied up with our history of dating and marriage. And those times have been different from place to place. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, we live in a particular place that has a particular set of kind of cultural history and that kind of stuff. Does the Bible say anything clear in that space? And where it does, we really need to obey that and live it out. And where the Bible's silent or it allows freedom, we go, there's some sort of flexibility. So is there a perfect dating scheme, a perfect biblical dating scheme? I don't think that there is one. But I have argued, at least in the talk, that there's a bunch of things that I think are really important. So seeking to do dating in a space where you're connected to your community, in particular older, wiser people and your family. I think that's really important. I think doing it in a way that respects how we've been made and looks towards godliness is really important. And then within that framework, I think there's freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Um, okay. Um, as Christians, how should we understand attraction and how important should it be in deciding whether or not to date someone? Have we brought too much into our culture which tells us that the person we date is a personal choice which meets our needs and desires? And if so, how do we change that? Should we be willing and open to dating someone that we're not actually attracted to?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important question. And I think it touches deeply on some of the things that we kind of raised in the talk. So um, I do think that our concept of kind of marriage for the sake of romantic love, if I can kind of use that term, I do think that that's a relatively modern and very kind of Western idea. And I think that it's helpful for us at the very least to see that we have imbibed a bunch of stuff that's not necessarily the biblical picture of reality. But even then, I mean, attraction is a strange thing, right? like, what attracts one person to another person? And I see all sorts of couples that work, and I think I would find that strange, but there's clearly a deep affection and love and whatever. So I think that attraction is actually much broader than we normally give it credit for. But I want to acknowledge that I think our very visual world and so much stuff which is done uh, on a screen, in person, the way that the whole kind of the advertising industry, etc., is all about what's visually appealing and attractive, has trained us from a very young age to rate that very highly in our set of values. And I really do want to say that in lots of ways that should be, I think biblically, that's actually a minute, if at all, reality. So I think I want to say to people, be thoughtful about what you're attracted by and realize that some of those things are probably less helpful and some of them are more helpful. Over time, I think you can encourage yourself to be attracted towards things that are just beautiful in terms of the way that people relate, gentleness, respect, kindness, goodness, a willingness to serve other people. Like, I think all of those things can be very attractive qualities in another person. And I think we would do well as a Christian society to keep helping one another to remember that the things that really matter are those elements of reality
Yeah.
rather than kind of physical
Yeah.
appearance. Yeah.
So being conscious about actually taking a check almost about, well, what is it that I'm looking for? What am I finding attractive about someone? And if it just keeps on always being physical, then actually trying to be consciously, wanting to be attracted to qualities and to
Yeah.
character, to virtues in someone and in ourselves as well. Do you think attraction can change?
I don't think it just can change. I think it does change. Like, I think over time, attraction does change. And I think, like in a marriage relationship, if you talk to a couple who's been married for 30 or 40 or 50 years, there are elements of who they are now that they'll remember from kind of back when they first started dating. And there are other things that are radically different that they've grown deeply to love about each other and things like that. So I do think attraction is not a sedentary thing that just gets fixed and then it's kind of there forever afterwards. It shifts and changes all the time.
Yeah. And I guess connected to this, how do you even know if, oh, well, maybe not, but how do you even know if it's God's will for you to marry? For instance, one may wish to be married one day, but just because it is in one's will, it doesn't mean that it will happen, nor might it even be part of God's plan, God's will for your life. So, yeah.
Yep. Look, I think I want to say about that question. I think it probably depends on your understanding of what God's will looks like and how you make sense of that. So I would say biblically, there's this kind of idea of guidance that I've heard as a kind of God's got this. If you think of a target, God's got a kind of generally revealed will that kind of relates to everybody. So He says, you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't steal, you should speak the truth, etc., etc., etc. And then there's kind of more kind of deeper kind of concentric circles which get down. And some people would say there's one in the middle where God has a specific plan exactly for your life, and your job is to find it. Um, I just don't see any evidence for that anywhere in the Bible itself. I think what the Bible says is that God reveals the things that He wants us to know, the things that He says are important to Him, and then by His grace, He gives us freedom to make decisions. Now, I think God's in control of our lives, and we can look back and see his hand in things that have happened. But at each point, we make decisions based on what's the information that we have at the moment, applying the best wisdom that we have to what's a good decision in this space. And then as we make our decisions, we trust God's kind grace to work in those spaces, to grow us through them, even when we make mistakes, and to move forward. So the question is, how do you know if they're the one? Well, the answer is you wake up and you made promises to each other yesterday. They're the one.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually really freeing, isn't it? Because we don't have to guess what God's will is.
Yeah.
Be godly in your decisions, in who you're asking out to date, who you ask to marry.
Yep.
Be godly in your marriage, and then that's God's will for your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And know that as you try to work that out, God's gracious and kind and a father.
Yeah.
So he's going to work in each space. Sometimes you make decisions and you go, oh man, maybe that wasn't the best decision. Isn't it great that God forgives and is gracious, but promises even to work through our mistakes and failings to make us more like Jesus? I think that's really helpful.
Okay. Paul, in your talk, you said that saying yes to coffee isn't saying yes to marriage. But is a yes to coffee a yes to an exclusive relationship? Is that raising the stakes too high too soon?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. I kind of collapsed some of the categories in dating and used it as a kind of broad term to describe some sort of commitment to each other to work things out in a relationship. But in a sense, you could say there's even a space about how do you get from here to dating,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
here to marriage. And I do think I don't think yes to coffee is even yes to an exclusive relationship. I think if someone says, look, I'm just interested in getting to know you a bit better, I think you can do that a couple of times without making deep commitments to each other. We're just exploring here, we're chatting with each other, we're talking, see where that goes. And that's where I think we talked a little bit about the define the relationship conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's a point maybe after 3 or 4 dates, you spend a bit of time with each other, you've gotten to know each other a bit, you like to clarify things. The problem is there are no rules here, right? So
Yeah.
I feel, but I want to say it's okay to go out for coffee. It's all right to get to know someone a bit better. I think there is a point where you say we're going to work a bit harder at working out exclusively with each other, whether marriage is the next step, and you might want to call that thing dating.
Yeah. And you said 3 or 4 dates. For some people, it may be 10 dates before they have the define their relationship
Absolutely.
conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Does dating, and this is connected to that, does dating always have to be exclusive? And I guess it depends on the definition. So in other parts of the world, dating refers to a non-exclusive stage before the exclusive stage of, I guess, being in a committed relationship.
Sure. Yep.
So is there a place for that? So, someone may go for coffee with one person and then, another person in the same week. And they're both dates.
Yeah. Look, I think I don't personally have particular problem with that. But I do think it's a space where there can be lots of miscommunication that takes place. And so I personally, while I say I don't think there's necessarily anything morally wrong with it automatically, I don't think I'm married now, so I'm not going on any dates except with my wife. But if I was in that space, I think if I had gone out for coffee with someone, I wouldn't accept an invitation with somebody else until it had become a bit clearer what was going on in that space. Because I think that I just think there is, given how our culture works and what most people think is happening in those spaces, I think to kind of go on 3 dates with 3 different people over 2 weeks or whatever, will be seen as some sense of betrayal or disappointment, even though you haven't made an absolute commitment to
So checking why you're doing that, and
I think thinking about your own motives and working out what you think might be being communicated would be a helpful way.
Okay. Paul, you talked about dating as a committed relationship. What are you committing to, given that you're still exploring whether or not you're going to get married or not?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of follows on from that conversation, which is I think at the point of saying, we're going to see each other, we're going to get to know each other, you've kind of committed to working out with that person whether this relationship is kind of heading in that marriage direction and spending time and getting to know them in a particular way. So I think at that point, what you're committing to is not relating to other people in that kind of way. Which I think would be things like at that point in time, I would certainly not go out on with coffee with somebody else who's asked me out of a romantic interest of any form. I think depending upon, there will be certain levels of sharing and awareness and exclusivity and talking and other things, and even possibly forms of physical contact that wouldn't happen in another place. But again, I think you could define those slightly differently depending on who you are as a couple and how that falls out as you have that kind of conversation.
Yeah. Um, you touched on this a little bit in the talk, but maybe you want to chat a little bit more about it. Dating seems to have a lot more rules and boundaries than expected. Maybe the person felt quite overwhelmed in the talk.
Sure,
How do
yeah.
we balance actually enjoying each other's company and not stifling the relationship under the rules, but while also honoring and loving God?
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? There's if we're intentional about something, if we make decisions to do something, for some of us that feels like it crushes spontaneity, right? They're kind of opposed to each other. I'm going to be spontaneous, or I can be intentional. If I'm intentional, I'm not being spontaneous. Um, I, I think I would encourage you, I think, just to loosen up slightly in that space. I think the Bible encourages us to be intentional about these things. Relationships are deep, they matter, they involve our godliness, so it's important to do them and get them right. But relationships don't work because they're always intense and intentional.
yeah,
And so, learning how, um, out of love and care, wanting to respect you, care for you, and be wise, I might put some limits around. We might agree some limits around how we use the mobile phone and what level of physical contact we have and other things. There's still an enormous space once you've done all of that, just to work out how to have fun and hang out with each other, laugh at things, learn what each other's dreams are and what they hope about the future, learn what makes them laugh and what makes them cry. Enjoy doing fun things together in life. And so I particularly think um, getting out and doing things together forms a great context too for conversation. Like, and different people are different. So, and a couple of them, it's playing tennis or going for a bike ride or going for a bushwalk, or maybe it's just sitting in a coffee and reading a book together and sharing ideas with one another. Like, so many different things about personality. But I just think it needs to be fun.
yeah. And that fun, that enjoyment, I mean, the things that you just mentioned, they're not extraordinary things. They're just normal, ordinary things, aren't they? That you'd be doing whether you're not dating or whether you are dating, and you do them by yourself, you do them with other people, whether the same sex or opposite sex or dating. So, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
doesn't need to take that much imagination.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although for some of us, it feels harder
Yeah,
than
yeah, yeah,
others,
yeah.
right?
We put the pressure on. Yeah, okay. Just in terms of family culture, so how much should I consider my family culture when considering dating someone? And I guess
Yeah,
parental expectations, things like that.
yeah. I mean that is really that is such. I think this is one of the hardest questions to answer out of all the questions that we've been asked. Um, the Bible encourages us to respect our elders and to respect and love our parents. But what that means looks radically different. I mean, I know people who've grown up in a Christian home with loving parents who've been gracious and wise and have a really rich and wonderful relationship. I know other people who've grown up in spaces with parental relationships which have even been abusive or really difficult, and so that's really hard. And obviously, the gap between those two things is so massive that to say to everybody, you're doing that's just clearly not helpful or not healthy. So I do want to say, be aware of where you've come from. Um, but I think in terms of being aware, where possible, if you have some level of trusting relationship with your parent, it's good to just ask them what they think about the other person and you and get their wisdom and insight. I think that can be helpful. I don't think that's mandatory. But I think more significantly, one of the things I would do in trying to get to know someone is work out how is their family different from my family and what kind of just general expectations does that create about the way that we do life with one another. Really interesting things like, how did your family handle conflict, for example? We never did to disagree with each other. World War III breaks out. We shout at each other half the
Yeah, yeah.
time. And nobody ever takes it personally, and everybody just walks away and tells it. So there can be radically different things about our history and family history and culture that can sometimes make working out how to relate to each other really complex and difficult. So working out how to talk with each other in a kind of curious, interested way to get to know what their family was like and what mine was like If you've come from a family of one child versus 6 children, that's going to have a radical impact on the way that you relate to each other. So talk about that stuff and then think about, well, what expectations does that cause me to have about the other person? And why do I keep getting surprised when they do this? It's not, most of the time, it's not because they're evil or nasty or weird. It's just because they've had a very different experience to you. And that can be really enriching.
Mm.
Yeah.
What about different ethnic groups and so different ethnic backgrounds? So it might be that someone's parents are saying, actually, we're not happy with you dating that person because they're from a different ethnic background.
Yep.
What would you suggest to the Christian who is wanting to date that person?
Yeah. I mean, I think,
Whether the parents are Christian or not.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would encourage you to move slowly, I think. I would try not to, as much as possible, make it don't turn it into a war between you and you could very quickly feel hurt or disappointed or frustrated about that and become very negative, and then turn it into kind of almost a tug of war with that person. Are they going to side with their parents or side with you? I don't think on the whole that's very wise Christianly. So I would have thought trying to be patient, trying to respect where you can, cultural things that are in place that would be helpful, trying to get to know that other person's parents would be a helpful and healthy thing to do. Although you may not have a lot of control over that, like they may be very resistant to that process. But I've seen this situation unfold amongst a number of couples on campus dating with each other. I feel like, on the whole, the couples have done best who have worked out how to keep the person whose parents are from that background having lots of conversations with their parents about why this matters to them and talking it through and trying to display respect for them, but a kind of clear position. I still love this person. I want to get to know them. The person who's external to that relationship being willing to just be adaptable around certain areas of custom and culture and things like that and show respect, and work out how to speak with honor and dignity when you disagree.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And for that person, not to be undermining, their partner, for want of a better words, relationship with their
Yeah,
parents and,
absolutely.
things
Yeah,
like that.
totally.
Yeah. And that's potentially an easy thing to do when you're feeling, threatened or,
Well,
yeah,
because it's
like,
very personal, isn't
yeah,
it? They don't want him to marry
yeah,
me, or they don't
yeah,
want her to marry me. Gee, what do they think of me?
yeah,
That can make me feel very kind of,
yeah,
my walls go up and I get a bit kind of, I want to defend myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think it's a completely understandable reaction. I think Christianly we want to act with grace through that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess so with that question and the previous question in terms of tricky or different family backgrounds, it leads into this question. Really, is counselling ever a good idea when you are dating, even if you have not yet decided to get married?
I think it can be. I've been in a few situations where I've encouraged couples to go and do that because they see lots of good things in each other. They're really interested about the future, but sometimes, again, family history or particular habits that have grown up in a relationship create conflict and tension in ways that perhaps a little bit of external help to talk it through can give you a different perspective that allows you to work through that in a way that gets you to a healthier place in relationship. So I think that there can be real wisdom in that, particularly if both parties are willing to say, we'd like this to work, we're finding this difficult. It might be helpful to get someone external just to help us think through that a bit. I think there can be a real place for that.
So it can sound like it's, upping the ante and formalizing things a lot more, but it doesn't mean that actually you've made the decision to get married. It's just helping clarify where your relationship's at and or different issues that you
Yeah,
have. So yeah, having a more healthy, godly relationship. Yeah,
so true.
yeah,
And I think too, like realizing, like we think, you're going to become an accountant, you learn skills. You're going to become a musician, you learn skills. And we just think, relationships, they just happen naturally. Actually, at one level, they're skills as well. And if you haven't had a background where you've learnt any of those skills, seeing someone can actually be a really helpful way of learning some skills to listen well, to understand, to work out how to negotiate difference. And so counseling can just be a space of learning some skills of growing in wisdom and maturity and learning how to relate healthily.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes we may need to just swallow our pride to actually make that appointment. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Why is heartbreak such a big thing in dating, and how do I get over it?
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
This question's it's deep, isn't it, John?
oh,
You know that the proverb that I started with. There are four things that I don't understand,
yeah,
and the last one's the way of a man with a mate.
yeah,
And we talked before about what creates attraction. It's so weird because different
yeah.
people are attracted to different things. Um,
And you could be attracted
there
to
are
someone and they're not attracted to you, and so heartbreak. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely. So I just think there is something kind of slightly mysterious, and the Bible says there is a kind of mystery about how these things work, and there are so many forces at work in us when they take place that it's hard to kind of work out. Why am I attracted? Why you? Etc. 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 Now I've completely forgotten the question.
In terms of heartbreak.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
So I think one of my observations flowing out of all of that, um, again, having watched lots of couples date and quite a few couples break up, I've seen some people for whom breakup has been sad, uncomfortable, painful, but a relatively smooth process. There've been some clear reasons. They feel like this relationship's not in the right place. They've mourned for it for a while and they've moved on. And a month or two later, things have kind of returned to an equilibrium. I've seen other people for whom a year later or 2 years later or even 3 years later, the discomfort of what happened, something about the way that it happened, something about seeing that person again brings up deep wells of emotion from kind of deep within the soul that feel like they're slightly out of control and kind of um, I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with people. I just think we're wired very differently. And for some of us, particularly, the circumstances of maybe of how a breakup happened or whatever can feel like it touches on particularly raw nerves in terms of our sense of identity or our sense of security or other things that cause deep emotions to come up. And so I think um, working out how to be tender and gentle with ourselves, um, working out how to accept that those emotions are real and you probably can't just scrunch up yourself and stop them from happening. But I wonder sometimes whether our anxiety or nervousness about experiencing those emotions makes them deeper and prolongs them. And again, at that point in time, perhaps if it's 6, 12 months down the track and you're still really deep, painful emotions, then again, I think going and talking to somebody with some skills in this space who might be able to give you some insights and ways of working through that. I think there's a healthiness to that.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
but it
yeah, because
it
someone
is
can
a
feel, yeah,
sad, painful
yeah.
place, isn't it?
Because sometimes some people can feel like they'll never ever get over it.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
that sense of hopelessness,
yeah.
and yeah, yeah.
But I want to say, like, just generally, I mean, there is a real grief. If you've been in deep, real relationship with someone, if you've shared regularly about what's happening in your life and then they've gone,
Mm,
um, there are lots of similarities with losing somebody,
yeah. So it's
right? With
normal and healthy to
so
grieve.
grieving
Yeah,
is a normal part of being
yeah.
human in that
And
space,
a necessary.
and grief, the experience of grief for people is this big, isn't it? Like, from small emotional things to very deep things, that experience is a very broad spectrum for people. So there's no one easy, neat way to grieve. We all do it differently.
Got some questions now, not so much about dating, but about divorce and about difficult marriages. So, what do you think about? Well, it is. This one is about dating, but what do you think about dating after divorce? Are divorcees allowed to pursue dating and remarriage?
Yeah. I mean, this is a really sensitive question. And I think that even in kind of committed evangelical circles, there'll be some differences of opinion in this space. Um, I think in Matthew 19, when Jesus talks about marriage, I would say that, he gives you that picture that marriage is a lifelong commitment, and the Pharisees come and ask him about divorce. And, they say, can you be divorced for any reason? And he goes, no, that's not the way that God's made marriage. It's actually a lifelong commitment. Uh, Matthew's gospel raises the possibility of adultery perhaps being a reason that a relationship has fallen apart. So it is possible to be in a space where you've been divorced through no fault of your own. Um, uh, I think that I personally think, and this is a complex space, and in some ways we could do hours on this, right? But I think the Bible probably does give some other reasons that might cause an annulment. Like I think marriage is a contract. I think it's an agreement that two people enter into. I think that it is possible that if someone has been deeply deceptive in that process, or someone has effectively abandoned you, I think there might be other spaces where I think divorce is is allowed in a way that might enable remarriage. I think I'd really encourage you to speak to your pastor about that, and to think through. One of the things I'd want to persuade people of, I think, is actually be persuaded in your own mind what you think the Bible is saying, and then want to honor God and live that out.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really key point, isn't it? Um, Encouraging people to look for themselves what they think the Bible is saying, rather than just
Absolutely.
okay, well,
Yeah.
that's I agree with what that person is saying, because there's lots of different opinions about divorce and remarriage.
Yeah.
So looking at God's word yourself, and seeing what you think it means,
Yeah.
but also listening to other people's opinions as well, and weighing them up from God's word. We've got a couple of different talks and papers on the Priscilla and Aquila website from our current principal, Mark Thompson, but also our previous principal, John Woodhouse, and also talks by other people on divorce and remarriage by Philip Jensen and other people.
Yeah.
So people are able to
Like,
use those
yeah, I think it's
resources.
so important to come to a clear mind yourself about what the Bible is actually saying.
Mm,
And then once you've done that, you need to actually act with a clear conscience
yeah,
in light of what you think God's actually calling you to.
yeah,
But I would say I don't think dating is the first port of call post divorce. I think there are circumstances where post divorce you might choose to date because the circumstances have led to a space where that's happened without any responsibility or fault on your part.
yeah. Um, you touched on yeah. So maybe how is it? You touched on this a little bit before in terms of guidance in lots of ways, but this is maybe someone is feeling like this after the fact, after making a decision. How is it God's good and perfect plan for me if I'm terribly unhappy in my marriage?
Yeah, I mean that is such a deep question. Um, I think there are a number of things that I would want to say there. Um, this is not meant to sound harsh, but it's actually important to realize um, that's not just a question about marriage in the end, but it's a more general question about suffering. That is, how can it be God's good and perfect plan that I get cancer? How can it be part of God's good and perfect plan that, you know, my child dies? How can, like, there are so many spaces in life where we can ask that question of God. And there's a kind of very deep answer to those questions that I don't want to spend lots of time on now, but I do think that we need to see that God is in control of the whole world. Sin has genuinely broken things in ways that mean that we don't expect perfection this side of Jesus' return. God does promise that even in our suffering that he will grow us, and we need to cling to him and live with faithfulness to our word and to his truth in that space. So I guess I'd want to probably step a little away of asking the question, is this God's good and perfect plan? And using that as well, if it's not, it's okay. I can get out of it, or it is, or whatever. Uh, but I think perhaps getting people around about you and finding people that you can trust, that you could talk to Christianly and with a biblical basis about why is it difficult, what's going on there, to what extent uh, there are very unhealthy spaces where other people are being unhealthy, and perhaps you do need to separate or get out of that marriage for your sake, for children's sake, and for others. Um, Sometimes it is possible that your unhappiness will partly be about you and the way that you're contributing, or even just your own emotional health and other things. There's just so many complexities there. But I would encourage you to find people in your context that you trust, who love Jesus and love the scriptures, to help you make some good, concrete decisions about what's going to be healthy for
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Paul. Um, and what about dating after my spouse has died? Things to consider.
you.
Things to
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some
Um,
Christians say actually that you should never ever remarry.
Yeah, so there's a dissolublest
Yeah,
position, right,
indissoluble.
on
Yeah.
marriage, which basically the marriage is one covenant for life. Once you've done it once, you can never do it again. It seems to me that the Bible, I don't think that's what the Bible says. So I think 1 Corinthians 7, for example, when Paul says to widows, you're free to marry only in the Lord, that seems to me to suggest that the Bible says, and the Bible certainly says a covenant exists until the point of death and then the covenant disappears in Hebrews, for example. So uh, I think that the marriage covenant is dissolved at death and therefore remarriage becomes a possibility. Um, Obviously, some of the things that I said in the talk are important. I don't think it's something that I would leap into in the first month or two. But it's possible to laugh about that. But in the emotional distress of grief and anguish, perhaps the attention of another person might become a way of avoiding shortcutting. There's things there. So I would say don't rush into it, but certainly, I mean, life goes on and you may get to a point where it's actually right and appropriate to date again. I think in that space, it's just worth realizing. And when I say realizing, it may actually require conversation and stuff to work this out for yourself. Just how much your previous experience of relationship affects your expectations going into this new relationship, and therefore you're wanting and not wanting. And so even you can find yourself comparing either radically positively or radically negatively this new person with what you've experienced before. And so if you can find ways of going, that was its own relationship, this will be its own relationship. And so it's going to be different and unique. And I'm going to have to learn how to navigate that a bit, and realizing how much the emotional stuff. So one of the things I would think is even working out how you mourn the spouse that you've lost and how this person that you're starting to date, how they cope with that. What does that mean for the relationship? Can you work out how to do that in a way that's healthy for both of you? And sometimes you might be able to, and sometimes not. I think, yeah.
Often it seems to be that people have strong opinions about the person getting remarried. Um,
Yep.
wisdom, I mean, even if they're not related to the person. So, any wisdom about what to say to say, like, if my spouse had died and I'm, planning on I'm dating someone or
Yep.
considering it and wanting to get remarried, and I've got different people giving their opinion. What do you got any wisdom about that, Paul?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at first I'd want to, even why they're giving their opinion will be different. But I suspect for at least some of them, it's well intentioned, right? They're wanting to protect you. They're wanting to, or they just have strong, uh, they have strong personal feelings about these things. I think learning how to listen to them, respect the intention with which something is said, but realize that ultimately you're free under Christ to make your own decisions. And so working out how to say, look, I've heard that. I respect that. I've heard your opinion. I've got a different opinion, and here's why. I think that's really important and helpful. And to realize too that probably some of the people giving the opinions have had real relationships with your spouse that have died as well, and so for them it represents a grief if you enter another relationship. Like for your children, there's obviously huge emotional things that they're going to go through, and even if they're adult children or very adult children, so just being aware that this new relationship forms emotional waves for everybody who's kind of part of that community system, and realizing you need to let people have their own emotional reactions in that space. But don't, I say this as if it's easy to do. I think this is really, really difficult, but try not to let that knock you off balance. If you've got good reasons and you're biblically free and this is a wise thing to do, working out how to do that and relate well to those people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about, so this is a couple of questions now about sex and children in marriage. Is marriage without sex a sin?
Yeah, that's a very tricky question. I mean, part of the question for me is partly about what you well, sorry, I've got lots of things. What you define as sex, number one. So are we just talking about intercourse? Are we talking about other forms of kind of sexual engagement? So I think there's the reality of health and aging and other things become a part of this process. So it would be very different entering into a marriage where you said, I never wanted to have sex. Um, for me, 1 Corinthians 7 and the opening verses there of 1 Corinthians 7, which speak about the wife respecting her conjugal obligations to her husband and the husband respecting his conjugal obligations to his wife, Paul clearly says that sex within marriage is the right thing and it's an appropriate thing. So I want to say entering into a marriage but saying there's going to be no sex here, that doesn't seem to me to sit very healthily or happily with the Bible. But at the same time, I would want to say that I think that sex within a marriage is a negotiated thing and is radically affected by situations and stages in life and other things like that. I do want to say that being thoughtful and aware of and careful of your spouse's sexual needs is really important. So even if it gets to the point where for medical reasons or others, there's no sexual intercourse and stuff that's available, but perhaps assisting the other person to reach orgasm in various ways and things, I actually think that that's loving and healthy and helpful. But again, this is a really sensitive, deep area, isn't it, to work through? I think there's a space here again for finding someone that you trust outside the relationship if that's gone to a point of particular difficulty. But I would say if you are in a marriage relationship where you've gotten to the point where you just don't want to have sex with them anymore, which I suspect is often related to other relational areas of breakdown, I would still say I would want to guard, if it was me, I would want to guard my own heart, that I wasn't doing it out of selfish reasons. I would want to work out what it means to continue to love the other person as well as possible under the circumstances, aware that there's all sorts of things like abuse and stuff that completely change that paradigm.
Yeah, sure. And just on abuse though, because that was a question that is going to come up later, but maybe we'll answer it now. If there is abuse in my marriage or in my dating relationship, what should I do?
I really would want to encourage you to seek help, find people that you trust. It's very different, I think, in different spaces. I'm really thankful at this level for my denomination. So Sydney Anglicanism has worked really hard at having a professional standards unit, of having people. We do lots of training with our clergy now about how to love and care for people in this space and that kind of stuff. So I think that there are resources and people that you can go and speak to and be honest about what's happening, and you can get all sorts of assistance. I think Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7 that separation is a reality. I think it is it's a genuine option that's on the table in certain circumstances. If you're in an abusive relationship and separation becomes necessary for the safety of you, the safety of your children, and actually for the perpetrator of abuse, allowing them to continue. Sorry, that's language I want to be very careful about, because at one level, you're not responsible. And I'm not saying you are responsible, but I am saying what I want to say is separation can be a loving act towards that person as well. And that's important because an abuser will often tell you because you're Christian, you have to stay. And so getting some permission that Christianly separation might be a loving act is
The best thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that separation is a really important thing. I think if you're dating, whatever you do, don't proceed to marriage. For me, abusive behavior in a dating relationship would be a massive red flag.
Yeah. And just likely to magnify then in marriage. Whereas people can think, the problem's going to be solved once we're married, but no.
It will not get better.
It will get worse, much more opportunity for the perpetrator.
Right. And it becomes more secret. It becomes hidden within the home. The perpetrator gets more relational power.
Yeah.
All of those things. Marriage will not make it better.
Financial power and other things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have to have children in marriage?
Well, I mean, some people can't. So I just want to acknowledge straight up that there are some people for whom, in God's economy, that's not going to happen for them. I think that to enter marriage intentionally to remain childless, I think actually stands against the grain of Scripture, if I can use that as a term. I mean, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? The fact that you could be married and not have children is an incredibly modern phenomenon in terms of effective contraception. Like, it's really only the last 50 years, maybe 60, that we've had contraception that's effective enough that you could just do that. So for all of the rest of human history, I just don't think that was a viable option for the most people. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, if you're married, you should have sex regularly. I'm pretty sure those things go together in a way that kind of creates children. But I think that's a very kind of biological description. The Bible's incredibly enthusiastic about the blessing of children and about the privilege of raising children to know and love the Lord, and of the incredible opportunity and blessing it is, I think, to have a family and to grow people in that space. So I would say to people, if you're getting married, I think Christianly you are making a commitment that it's highly possible that you will fall pregnant, and that children will be part of that relationship. I don't think it honours the grain of Scripture to enter into a marriage saying uh, we're not going to have children. But I also want to acknowledge that childlessness is a place that some couples experience for medical and other reasons, and that's not their fault. Yeah.
Okay. So this question is from a parent. My older teenager has someone showing interest in dating them and is asking me for advice. Should I encourage dating or not? They are both Christian. What wisdom would you give to a Christian parent with regard to how much input they should have with the dating life of their children, and what sort of input should that be if you think they should give input? And maybe you
Yeah.
want to speak from personal experience, Paul.
I'm going to have to be very careful what I say here. I have 3 young adult children. I think I want to say, if your child is interested in any way in engaging your input, I want to say, take that as a word from the Lord and rejoice in that. I actually think, like, I want to encourage Christian children as they grow through the teenage years and into that dating phase. Particularly if you've got Christian parents, yeah, they are wiser than you perhaps realize.
Because there's a number of teenagers listening. So
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
from the
Like,
teenagers' perspective as
I
well.
want to
Yeah.
say, I know that your parents are old and stupid and they don't make the wise, all that kind of stuff. But actually, they've lived a lot of life and they've had lots of experiences. And so there's lots of wisdom to be gained there. So I would say, go and talk to your parents. Now, you'll feel uncomfortable about it. I know that all of my children have felt uncomfortable about coming and talking to us at various points. Although one of my sons would now say to you, yeah, look, Dad was surprisingly helpful, I think is the phrase that he would use. Yeah, but I think as a Christian parent, um, I want to say, don't just let them cut you out and live their own life. Continue to try and have healthy input, but have healthy input that respects that they are becoming adults and that they need to live by they need to experience the consequences of their own decisions and live by them, and you just can't protect them from everything. But so what that's looked like for us a little bit, I think, is having conversations around like what's healthy and helpful behavior. So when boyfriends or girlfriends are at our house, they're not allowed in bedrooms. They're supposed to hang with each other in public parts of the house. So we've had conversations like that with our kids. We've talked about what attracts them to this person and why they want to get to know them. We've talked at various times about when they've disagreed with each other. How do you navigate that in a helpful way? How do you listen well to the other person? So little opportunities that you get to share with your kids about what does the Bible say about wisdom for godly relationships, I think is gold. But you've got to do it in a way that respects their autonomy and their growing responsibility for themselves, I think.
And one of my friends, their child is one of their children is dating someone, and they've made the comments to me recently about how that person relates to the other siblings as well. That's quite diagnostic of what this person is like, and they've just, from the parents' perspective, they've really appreciated how that person has related to the other siblings.
Oh, you mean the person who's dating their child from outside?
Yeah,
How
sorry, yeah,
for us, that's been
yeah.
massive as well. Like
It's very
watching,
diagnostic, isn't
it
it?
is very diagnostic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. What about vocational ministry? If I'm considering vocational ministry, how should that affect how I think about dating? Yeah.
Yeah,
Who I think who I should date and things like that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, obviously, I think it does affect it. I think um, the decision to do ministry is something that affects your whole family, whether you like it or not. if you're in a ministry home, there is people have access to your life. Your kids grow up in a different space, and if you're not in that together, it's very hard to navigate that space well unless you're both committed to, we think this is important and we're going to try and do this. So I do think that's a kind of conversation that's worth having in the dating space. And I think therefore somebody who, but that doesn't mean a particular personality type, I think. Like I've seen, for example, friends in ministry with wives who are really involved and really upfront and run everything. Seen other women who are much more behind the scenes, don't do much upfront stuff. So it's not a prescription for there is a particular personality type to marry
Yeah.
if you're going into that space.
Yeah. Or even gifting. It's
Yeah,
more the
no.
desire
But
to want to do that. Yeah.
but if they love Jesus and are prepared to work with you to create a home that's outward looking and ministry focused and all that kind of stuff, I think they're good things to talk through and engage with. I do want to say though that change happens, and so there's one particular couple that I can think of, and he said to her early in the relationship, "I'm planning on becoming a missionary. Um, we can't date unless you're prepared to become a missionary too." And she said, "I'm prepared to become a missionary." They dated, they got married, and then at a point in their married life, she got to the point where she said, "I'm not sure that I can handle being a missionary." His initial response was, "Yeah, but you said to me that you were going to do this." But as they talked it through, they got some help about that. They realised she hadn't been deceptive. It was just that as life had gone on and she'd understood herself better and whatever, it had become clear to her that she wasn't sure that she would cope very well in that space. He worked out that that was true of her as well. And so they're now in ministry, but they haven't gone on the mission fields because they've worked through those issues. So it's worth realising, even with the best intentions, you can get to the point of being married, and then life circumstances and other things are going to reshift your plans. So you need to let God have some control over that future and realize, as much as you say, "Are you interested in ministry?" Yes, I am. Yes, I am. What that looks like is going to keep unfolding as you go along.
Yeah, and be honest, and there's lots of different ministries that someone can be doing as well.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
A couple of questions about porn, pornography. You mentioned porn being a significant problem. How do you balance this common experience and associated shame with wanting to enter into a relationship? If I'm regularly failing, should I not seek a relationship? And another one, my boyfriend is growing in his spiritual life but hasn't overcome porn addiction. He's struggling in that. While I want to be helpful by praying or in other ways, it hurts me a lot every time he gives in. Is it wise to continue dating him or should I break up with him? So I guess from both sides, in a sense, someone
Yeah.
who's struggling,
Yeah.
and then from someone whose partner is struggling.
I find this question difficult partly because, Paul says that one of the reasons for getting married is that if you burn with passion, 1 Corinthians 7. And so I think that if you are struggling with porn, that's probably related to how you're wired sexually and physically. And so at one level, marriage is a good goal. I do want to say, though, that ongoing porn struggles do create significant emotional waves in relationship for really understandable reasons. And so I want to say, if you are struggling with it, make every effort to get clean, if I can use that kind of language. Actually go and find people who will help you be accountable. Sometimes professional counseling can really be helpful in this space. Particularly, I think, again, there's an argument about whether it's addiction or not. I think it has all the hallmarks of addictive behavior. And I think that it's very difficult to break if you have been deeply ingrained in that addictive behavior for a long period of time. It can take months or years to actually break yourself out of that space. So that's obviously a really significant thing. I would want to be working hard at dealing with it and have acknowledged it's a problem and making progress before I entered into a dating relationship, I think that's for your sake and for the sake of the other person. Once you are in that relationship, and particularly if you're not the person using porn and the other person is, I would just want to encourage you to be really wise and thoughtful about assessing the relationship. I think it's possible to have that addictive behavior and actually to be godly in lots of other spheres of your life at the same time. And you can watch a person making genuine effort to repent and really making progress, even though it's happening sometimes. You have to work out whether you can tolerate the fact that they're going to fall over and make some mistakes in that area. I think that's a remarkably hard ask, and I don't think the Bible requires it of anybody. So for you to stay in that relationship, I think you need to work out, this is perhaps something that you're going to experience occasionally. It's going to hurt you. Is the hurt that it's causing you causing such distress or friction in the relationship that it's actually really unhealthy for the relationship? I would say if yes, then that might be a real reason to break up. But I would say that I have seen some people who have managed to work out how to persevere through that and have created really healthy relationships longer term. But you probably can't stay there forever, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Why do many speakers on this topic minimize the very strong and real sexual desires of women?
Yeah. I hope you're not talking about me, and if I did, I really am sorry about that. Um, there's an interesting reality stereotypically. So I do lots of pre-marriage counselling, for example, and talk to lots of young married couples and whatever. The vast majority of couples, um, there is a difference between the way that male and female sexuality works as a broad stereotype, but not necessarily on the basis of each individual. So I think men are much more, they just experience arousal much more regularly. They're much more interested in sex much more quickly. It can be slightly less relational, although that's not good for them, but there's just kind of ways about that we're wired that are different from each other. And so there are some stereotypical general differences between male and female sexuality that will mean that pastors particularly will sometimes talk about men and women a different way, or if they're male, they will talk from the male perspective without being aware of the female's perspective. So I think all of those things kind of play into that space. But I want to say, even though there's those broad stereotypes and there are differences in the way that sexual response and arousal and other things work, I want to say that there's so much overlap that I have seen many relationships where the woman's desire for sex is greater than the man's in marriage, or even at certain periods of time in marriage, it can actually go from one partner to the other's partner and back again. And I think particularly because of those stereotypical differences and some of our cultural history, for women who experience particularly intense sexual arousal and desire, there can be a sense of embarrassment or shame about that. And I just want to say to them that I think that you're just part of the normally broad spectrum. I don't think there's anything to feel guilty or wrong about that. But again, that just means learning to manage that in healthy ways and in godly ways is a difficult thing and probably a challenge for you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about what if women don't dress to arouse, as that's not their intention, but arousal happens anyway? It's out of their hands.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of speaks to one of the questions we talked about earlier. Just the nature of attraction and arousal is complex. And even why we are aroused by particular things will be partly a pattern of previous exposure and history, and the way that our bodies work. If you've been aroused in certain contexts, a particular scent or color or other things can cause arousal, even as a kind of random thing. So you have to be aware of all of that complexity. I would say if you're not dressing to arouse, that's fantastic. I think if you're in a dating relationship, arousal will happen because you like each other and you're going to find each other attractive. In fact, at kind of psychologists talk about a thing called limerence. In the early months of dating, your body releases a whole bunch of chemicals that genuinely make the sky bluer, the birds sing more often, and everything much more happier, and you don't see the wrong things in your partner. So you go through this space where there's this incredibly strong sense of attraction and arousal that usually dies over time. So that's all part of a kind of early response that's probably going to happen for everybody. So I'm just saying, be thoughtful about that. Don't dress in ways that cause it. And in another level, whatever you do, it's going to happen because you're dating with each other. So be thoughtful and careful. But if someone from outside you or the person you're dating says, when you wear that, I find it particularly difficult, just listen to that and be thoughtful about that.
What about if a couple like a couple that's dating sin sexually?
Yeah.
Do they have to get married? Are they allowed to break up? Are they allowed to break up and date other people?
Yeah. So I would say first and foremost, absolutely, there is no compulsion to get married. I think it's really important to put that out there. The fact that you have been sexually involved with someone does not make a marriage. It's interesting that when Paul talks about, for example, visiting prostitutes in 1 Corinthians, you do join them. You are joined and united to each other in the point of sex, but he doesn't talk about that in terms of marriage. And so I don't think that sex automatically equals marriage or a commitment to each other relationally. And particularly if sexual behavior has been part of unhealthy habits or patterns of relationship in dating, which it almost invariably is. It can sometimes mean that you're so closely, like orgasm releases two kinds of chemicals, oxytocin and vasopressin, both of which are bonding chemicals that create pair bonding and loyalty in relationship, right? So if you've been sexually involved with the person you're dating with, the likelihood is that you will feel a deep emotional, personal commitment to them. But sometimes that clouds the fact that the relationship's not very healthy or working very well.
Yeah.
So you absolutely need to feel the freedom to break up and work out how to distance yourself from that kind of sexual engagement with each other.
Great, thank you. How should we keep someone accountable when they have gone too far?
Yeah, I mean, I'm presuming on the basis of this question that they've actually come to you and said we've done the wrong thing.
I guess.
And if someone, if you think that they have if you're a Christian brother or sister and you think that your brother or sister in Christ is in a dating relationship and you're concerned about how far they've gone and you have a reasonable relationship, I think you should go and actually ask that question. How are you going? Are you honoring Jesus sexually? And then, etc. If they've actually acknowledged it or admitted it to you, I would work out with that person who are the one or two people that they're going to be in an accountability relationship with. That might not be you. It might be appropriate that that's somebody else. But I would want to ensure that they are in an accountability relationship where they're regularly being asked specific questions about how they're acting and whether they're maintaining sexual purity with the person that they're dating. I think that's really helpful. But I also think I want to say to people, it's your heart that matters in the end. So you can have all the rules in place that you like, but you can find ways of circumventing most rules. So it's actually about a heart attitude, I think. And so talking to them about why sexual purity matters, why they want to honor Jesus in that space in life, and encourage them to find ways of putting that into practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is sex all right to have if the sole purpose and intention is not for bodily pleasure, but just to connect with your significant other on a physical, intimate level?
I just don't think that that's true. I think biblically, sex is kept for within the marriage relationship. The language that the Bible uses of fornication, kind of adultery, and then porneia, which is general sexual immorality. That language precludes sexual activity outside of marriage. Yeah.
What do you think of the argument that the only biblical categories are friendship and marriage, and therefore dating couples should relate as friends, and the only types of physical contact for those dating are those appropriate to any other friendship of the opposite sex?
Yep. Um, I think that there's some real merit to that argument. I think that there's a few issues with it. I think one is that what kind of physical activity looks like radically varies from culture to culture. Like what even is physically acceptable in a friendship relationship looks very different in different cultures. So exactly what it means is at least culturally relative at that point.
Some cultures, the same sex hold hands walking down
Absolutely.
the street.
Yeah. All that kind of behavior happens, or whether giving someone a hug is acceptable or not acceptable is culturally bound, and all
Kissing
of that kind of
and,
stuff,
on
and
the
all
cheeks.
et cetera, et cetera. So I think as a general rule of thumb, I get it. I think that there is As you're dating and getting to know one another, I think that there are moments when someone's sad or whatever, when perhaps a hug is an appropriate way of expressing comfort or kindness or gentleness in a space, which I think could be appropriate and real. Um, so I think what it's getting at is being really thoughtful about sexual involvement with each other and being pure and maintaining a healthy distance. I'm just saying what that looks like is very culturally bound and family bound and a whole bunch of other things, and even personality bound. Some people who are highly tactile and some who are not. I just think you need to talk about those differences and work out what are healthy ways for you to express healthy physical contact
Yeah.
within a dating
Yeah.
relationship.
You mentioned burning with passion before, and this question is: what if I burn with passion, but I can't find someone to marry?
Yeah. I can I say this is a situation that I've sat with lots of. I mean, I'm male, so most of my pastoring in this space has been with young males on a university setting. I know a number of guys that I've sat with and kind of grieved and mourned and whatever. I think the reality is that you do have to trust that God's provision will happen at God's time. And if God's chosen not to provide you that at this moment in time, then working out how to deal healthily with the temptation and the sexual struggles that you experience is just a really important thing to do. I think share with a couple of close brothers, if you're male, sisters, if you're female, about the struggle that you're going through. I think ask people to pray for you. I think try and work hard at making yourself accountable, but also trust that because it is about God's provision, that if that's not what God's provided for you at this moment, this is by God's grace a moment to genuinely grow in godliness. And so it is an opportunity to grow in honoring Jesus. And like other struggles in life, that will sometimes feel incredibly painful, and you will mourn over your failings and all of those things which are really real. And it's okay and appropriate to look towards marriage. But I'm saying even then, marriage won't necessarily solve everything. So I know people who struggled with pornography before they got married. I've known people who struggled with pornography after they've gotten married, for example. Marriage is not the sole solution to everything.
Mm.
Yeah.
How important is your partner's purity if they have become a Christian after they had premarital sex with a previous partner, or is that not recommended at all? So, yeah.
Yeah. What do you reckon is going on with the not recommended at all bit, Jane?
Okay, so should you consider going out with someone who's had sexual history when they weren't a Christian, or
Yeah,
not
right.
go out with them?
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I was
Yeah,
just trying to check. No, I think that's sorry. I think the forgiveness of Jesus means that we can be forgiven for our past and we can be changed. So past sexual history doesn't preclude relationship in the here and now. But I do think there is also for you personally what that means for your interaction with them, your sense of jealousy, how that's going to impact the relationship. Might mean for you personally, you will make the decision not to do that, not because it's wrong or sinful, but because the impact of that on you will make it very hard to have a healthy relationship with
yeah,
that person. So I think that would be a good decision.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how do Christians find other like-minded people to date?
Yeah.
I think that's a great question, isn't
I
it?
think it is a great
Yeah,
question. I mean, I think it's tricky, isn't it? Depending upon where you've gone to church, you might come to a church with lots and lots of other people at your age and stage in life.
sure.
Other people for whom they've come from church backgrounds where that's not the case at all. Um, I think that things like camps and conferences are helpful ways of kind of mingling and getting to know people from other places. Um, I'm aware that some people ask questions about kind of online dating services and whatever, and I'm aware that of a few kind of at least Christian in name, like I think Salt was one that's kind of entered the market relatively recently. I think I want to say about that, I actually don't have a particular problem with getting to like how do you meet someone? Well, you go to places where people are and you try to have a conversation with them. Like that's kind of, and I think that could happen through an online forum as much as any other. I would want to say, even though the site calls itself Christian, what Christian means can be very different for different people. So just be thoughtful and discerning about what matters to you in terms of uh, what your core beliefs are and those kinds of things, and be thoughtful, because one of the things that happens is, particularly if we feel a really deep drive or desire to be in relationship with someone, we end up compromising things that might matter to us for the short-term gain of that relational connection. So I would say, wherever you go to look for somebody, just be thoughtful about who you are and who you want to be as a Christian as you enter into that relationship. But I think that there are bunches of different kind of avenues for meeting people Christianly that are healthy and helpful. I don't know. Any
Yeah.
insight, Jane? Thoughts? No?
No, I think that's great. I
Thanks.
think that's, yeah. Just a couple of questions that are connected to friendship of the opposite sex. So this person's saying, generally, I find it super difficult to make Christian male friends while easy to make non-Christian male friends, because the Christian males, or could be Christian females if it was a guy
Yep.
asking it, because they tend to take too seriously me asking to hang out or grab a coffee together. How can I not be misunderstood? So, with going for coffee with a non-Christian, they can see it as maybe just coffee, whereas it's more heightened potentially with the Christian. And then another question: how can we help people develop close platonic relationships with Christians of the opposite sex? This seems lacking in the church compared to non-Christian contexts.
Yeah, that's a really big question in many ways. I think I would want to say part of the reason that the Christian and the non-Christian context looks different is because we have quite different sets of values, and so because for Christians, being acting with sexual propriety matters. Um, we tend to have spaces where men relate to men and women relate to women more, because we don't want there to be confusion that takes place. And I think there are lots of spaces in the world where the world's just gone, oh, look, all that stuff is totally irrelevant and we'll just do whatever we want. And people find themselves in compromising situations and doing things with people that they don't want to do. Um, our communities as Christians tend to be trying to protect us from that. Are we sometimes overprotective? I suspect that that's probably the case. But it does matter how old you are and the maturity of other people, and all those things kind of take place in that space. Um, I, I would, I have lots of friends of both sexes, um, uh, but I want to say um, I am particularly careful about friendships with people of the opposite sex, and how I relate to them in ways that protect and care for my wife and honor that relationship and the exclusivity of that relationship. Um, and so I think, you say, what can I do not to be misunderstood? I think asking a bloke out for coffee just by himself in a Christian circle in this part of the world, there's always going to be overtones of kind of interest like that. Just that's about understanding the culture that you live in. It's a bit like if you go to another country and you act in certain ways that signal certain things within that culture. There are some cultures where apparently this is yes and this is no, and you're doing the opposite thing. You say, "What can I do to help everybody understand me?" The answer is you can't. You're always going to be misunderstood in that culture until you adopt some of the habits of that culture. There's a sense of sadness and loss about that for some people. I do think there are spaces for group. I just think groups of people doing stuff together is really, really helpful. And so, going to someone's house where there's going to be half a dozen people doing dinner parties, doing all of that kind of stuff, creates lots of space to create healthy kinds of platonic relationships.
And even the dynamic of three people compared to two
It
changes
changes things,
the
absolutely.
dynamic quite a lot,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
totally.
Yeah. What about long distance relationships? Any wisdom on that? And specifically, time spent together online?
Yep. I think, I mean, you can do long distance relationships now in a way that you could not in another generation, I think, or they're just very, very different. When I was dating my wife, my family moved away from the town that we'd both lived in together. And so for my last year at high school, when we were dating, I went back to my family's house for the summer holidays, which is kind of 3 months apart. Phone calls cost about kind of $4 a minute or something. We'd take a bunch of 20-cent coins, drop them in the phone until we couldn't afford it anymore, and half an hour later we'd hang up because we'd spent all of our money, kind of thing. So, I mean, it's radically different, right? I think, though, like the danger of that, the danger of the connected stuff is that you just do all of it. Like you kind of turn on the video chat or whatever it is from the moment you walk in home at the end of the day, and then you kind of turn it off. And then I think that's I don't think, humanly speaking, that's a natural and normal state of affairs. And so the stuff I talked about the phone, about creating some spaces, we'll talk now, we won't talk at other times. We'll make sure that there's space for us to be alone as well as together. I just think that's really healthy to navigate, particularly in the long distance space. I think you have to understand yourself and the other person in a long distance space. Some of us are wired in ways that we will communicate better and more healthily. And for others of us, it will just cause a level of stress that will enter into the relationship and affect the relationship, whether you like it or not. I think get some wisdom about whether you're a person who can cope with a long distance relationship or not. And if you're not, that's okay.
Yeah. And you touched on some of this in your talk, just in terms of like whether you're going to be on screen, like lying in your bed, sitting in your bed,
I think absolutely
really late at night, and
yeah,
what good things happen really, really late at night, and
you know, be thoughtful about the contexts in which you share, because you can share each other's space all the time. Be thoughtful about that.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this, always really long conversations or anything. Like 5 minute, just, it could be something helpful, and
absolutely.
just to touch base, and that could be helpful. Also, you might want to go old school and actually hand write some letters, do things like that.
Letter writing is amazing. I know it's a lost art. Even doesn't even relate particularly, but Kathy's dad went overseas for a couple of months when she was a young adult, and he wrote letters to her while he was away. And she said, I learned stuff about my dad that I don't think I ever would have found out in any other context, because we were writing letters to each other. And I thought, oh, wow, isn't that really, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. That's great. Yeah. If you've been dating for a while, how do you know when you're ready for marriage? As Christians, would we believe in the one? So you touched on this before, but
Okay, so I don't believe in the one. There is no particular one, or at least if there is, you'll work it out once you've made the promises to each other. That's how you work out who the one is. But there is still a big decision. The thing that I would say is, I talked a bit about limerence. There is a genuine chemical thing that happens in your body in the early days of dating that makes you blissfully naive, and you think everything's great about the other person. I think you've got to get beyond that before you make sort of commitments to marriage. So I actually, when couples come and ask me, I say, have you had a decent fight? And what I mean is, have you gotten past the point where you just think everything about the other person is fantastic? And you can go, actually, yeah, there are these things that are flaws, or these things that are problems. I think it's going to be difficult for us. When you can get to the point of knowing what some of the strengths and weaknesses of each other's character are, and you've been able to talk through, am I willing to kind of live with that and work out how to deal with that? I think that's a helpful sign that you're at a point where you're kind of ready to marry the other person, and where you're willing to actually make that commitment. It is a lifelong commitment. So you need to stand up in front of friends and family and say, this is the person, and I'm committing to them, God willing, for the rest of our lives. So, yeah.
What's the place of saying I love you in a dating relationship? The Bible tells us to love everyone. Is this phrase, when said to a boyfriend or girlfriend, meaning something different than this?
Yeah. This is another place where I'd say the culture thing's really significant. So in my home, my kids have grown up in a space where I say I love you, and they say I love you to me all the time. So like that's just, so my sons, who are both bigger and blokier than I am, but they'll say I love you, Dad, when they're walking out the door or whatever. So like, how you've used that language in your home and culture growing up can have massive differences in terms of what you're communicating. So again, understand that about each other. I think it can be appropriate and useful language, but it can also someone that I read, I think it was Marshall Segal in his book, but I'm trying to remember which of the books it was. So this is just my guess about where it was. If it's
because
another book,
recommended 2 books.
Yeah, I did.
So it's on the handout, which is on the website.
He kind of talks about the fact that marriage, dating isn't marriage, and so the level of intimacy and engagement you would actually expect to be different He said, as we spoke when we were dating, we decided maybe there were some things that we wouldn't talk too much about now, and we would talk more about when we got to the point of getting married to each other. I just thought there's some wisdom about that, right? Some kind of, what do we want to be intimate about? How do we want that to take place? So I think how you use the "I love you" language needs to be negotiated, I guess, and used thoughtfully. But the flip side is, if you have grown up in a family where "I love you" is the thing, and then the other person's going, "Well, I don't want to say it to you," like you're also communicating something
Yeah,
negatively
something.
that's going to affect the
Yeah,
relationship at that time. So, yeah,
yeah. Um, I think this is a really important question, and it came up a couple of times. You believe that someone is a suitable person, but so do other people, and you find yourself in a situation where it seems like you have to compete. And I guess often that would be with someone else
that
that
you
you
know.
know. Yeah. How does one balance between pursuing and also not having conflict with other? Um, they've used the word competitors. So
It's hard, isn't it? That
yeah.
those
Oh,
deeply kind of those deep parts of us as human beings kind of
yeah.
come out in that space, don't they?
Yeah.
I just think. Um, well, I think in terms of not viewing the other person as a competitor, I'm presuming that this is in a Christian church space of some description, and the other person's Christian as well. So guard your heart by praying for the other person, giving thanks for the other person, and treating them as a brother and sister in Christ. So actually being real with God and dealing with your own jealousy and stuff. I think that's really important. Um, I think it's okay to say, if both of you are, you may know them very well or not very well, but both of you, and this person's kind of said to you, both of you are interested at the same time. I think it's acceptable to say, I am interested. Here are the reasons that I'm interested, etc., etc. Um, I I would want to work, and this again is tricky, at not being manipulative. So, and I think part of that is standing before God and saying, actually, this is their choice. It's not, it's not my choice. I'm going to be honest about how I feel. I'm going to be honest about why I like them. I'm going to be honest about, I would really love this to happen. But I want them to make a genuine choice for them. And a genuine choice might not be me.
Mm, great. Okay. Um, in your talk, you said about never in a million. Like I think you were giving different options, but yeah,
Yeah.
you said is never in a million years really an okay response to someone telling you they're interested in you? Like when like they
Yes.
say
Yeah.
I'm interested in you, and you've got the different options. Shouldn't we be more open and give people a chance, or at least give a good and clear reason for saying no, rather than saying never in a million years, which I don't think you recommended for. You weren't recommending to say that to someone.
No, I wasn't saying that that's what you should say. I was saying, if you go to ask someone out, you need to be ready for that as a
Yeah,
response.
yeah.
And I think I used that phrase as a kind of description of, no, I'm not totally not interested.
Okay.
But to engage with the
So
question a little
yeah.
bit,
So do you think if someone asks someone on a date, are they in a sense obliged to give it a go? Do they have to give it a go, or do they have the freedom to actually to say
yeah.
no as a fellow
And
Christian?
I think part of the reason for using the phrase "never in a million years," um, you don't always know what the history or the experience or where that other person is at or what's going on for them. And they don't need to tell you all of their history in order to explain to you why they've made a decision right here and now. So I think healthy, adult, mature relationship goes, I need to let you know. You may say, look, I'm just totally not interested. And I don't think they have to, I don't think there's an obligation for them to give you a reason for that, because the reasons that they're not interested may not just be totally inappropriate to share with you as the person who's asking.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Does the Bible have anything to say about age difference in dating?
Not as far as I can see.
Okay. You talked about developing your own, like having a sense of self. Um, can I develop my sense of self while dating someone, or is it better to be single, and then find your sense of self? Is finding your sense of self a good reason to break up? So I guess it's becoming more secure. You talked about the different elements.
Yeah.
What makes a relationship
Yeah.
a
So
healthy
when I'm
relationship?
talking about sense of self, I guess it's realizing that if I talk about kind of mature relationships aren't just held together by a deep sense of kind of mystical romantic attraction. They are actually kind of a commitment, a decision, and a bunch of other things where you're agreeing that you have thoughts, feelings, and responses to things, and they have thoughts, feelings, and responses to things, and they don't always line up with each other. You know, I, I see something that I find distressing. Kathy doesn't, or Kathy sees something that she feels upset about. I don't always feel upset about that. And so healthy relationships need a space where you can have that level of mutuality that go, you're allowed your response and my response is different. And we're going to try and work out how to do life together, even though we are different and have different responses to things. So I think when I'm talking about sense of self, it's being clear enough in yourself. I can talk about what I think and believe and feel in a way that is true, but doesn't require you to respond in a particular way or
Yeah.
react in a particular
Mm.
way.
And for some
Yeah.
people, they may realize that actually it is I probably shouldn't be dating now. I
And
might
I
wait.
think
I need to work through some stuff.
you can get
And
into a
then,
relationship and even be partway through where you start to realize, actually, I've realized I'm really emotionally bound up in this relationship and I am acting like angrily or unhealthily or
in an
whatever
ungodly
in
way.
ways
Yeah.
that that I am actually disappointed by. And, this is not actually, you know, it's not you, it's me, which I know is the terrible kind of cliche. But I think there are genuine situations in life where that's true and where they've realized it's not about you particularly. It's just about me being in this relationship at the moment is not giving me enough space to develop. Now, can you develop your sense of self if it's a healthy relationship? I think you can. And so I'm not saying that all relationships stop you from developing a healthy sense of self. But I think if you enter into the relationship out of a deep need to find your sense of self esteem or worth or whatever in the other person's love or whatever, I just think it's going to end up in a bad place.
Yeah. Yeah. Dysfunctional. Yeah. Um, Most of the time before starting, we're not sure if dating is going to work out. Is it better to date and break up than to never date in the first place?
Well, the answer is if you never want to be in a relationship, then that's okay. Um, it, life this is this is really hard, right? Like I get that this is really hard. Life is risky. I just think actually we're sheltered from it by a lot of our experience because we expect things to happen next week and they happen next week. Um, but the Bible tells us there's a sovereign Lord who's in control of all things. We live in a broken world that's been scarred by sin. And Ecclesiastes keeps saying, none of us knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So I think all of life actually contains an element of risk. Because relationships are so close to us, it creates a heightened sense of risk. But there is no way of developing that relationship without there being some risk involved. So I want to say, if that's important to you, then you just have to learn how to manage that element of risk.
These next couple of questions, yeah, touch on what you've just been saying, actually, Paul. But what would you say to single people who are perhaps afraid or hesitant to date, but are thinking about dating? How does one be open to date in a godly way? Are you called to be single forever if you get rejected many times and no one has been interested in you? I've been praying for a life partner. It's hard for me to find someone because I have a learning disability. I've been looking for someone in church. Dating app and blind date. Does Jesus want me to keep searching for a life partner or to wait? So, yeah, so I guess there's the hesitancy about dating. What would you say to
Mm,
that person? But then also, yeah, the single person that is no one is interested in, looks like no one is interested in anyway
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Um, the first thing I want to pick up on there, someone talked about kind of being called to singleness. Um, I think we have to be really careful about how we use that language. The call language in 1 Corinthians 7 um, actually refers, I think, mostly to your relationship of being called into relationship with Jesus. And there are a few instances where it describes the whole of the circumstances of your life, which are not binding, because in 1 Corinthians 7, if you're a slave, you can become free. If you're single, you can become married. If you can, so calling is not a perpetual, this is who you are and where you are fixed for it's a description of, in the providence of God, He has given you certain circumstances in your life right now, and that's God's gift to you to learn how to follow Jesus in that space. So I want to say the fact that you have been on a number of dates and they haven't worked out, I don't think that you can automatically read into that. That's a sign that I'm now supposed to be seeing. Like, I just don't think that that's how guidance and wisdom biblically works. So I don't think that's true. What I do want to say, though, is it is possible to make being in relationship an idol. And I think that while um, finding a spouse is going to involve some engagement and active searching and talking to people and other things, it is also possible to realize that you're at the point where that has consumed your life. Your mental energy, it's what you think about when nobody's around. It's what you started to look to as being the sole kind of provider of fulfillment or a hope for the future, all of those kinds of things. At the point where those things you start to become aware of them, they are significant things that you have to work out about your relationship with God. And so I think that there is a time and space sometimes to say, and maybe you might commit yourself to some of the people, I'm not going to date for a while. I'm going to do some stuff to remind myself that I want Jesus to be the first priority in my life. I want to train my heart that relationship isn't the salvation and soul of everything. Because the other problem is if you think that and you get into a relationship that provides it for you and you get married and you spend 40 years with that person, that relationship will not, it just can't. Another human can't provide you everything you need. So working out to what extent you're pursuing that as the thing and being willing to step away from that, I think is really important.
That question about the person being, afraid or hesitant to date. So a couple of my friends, if they've kind of been a bit hesitant or maybe a bit unsure about the person, but sometimes I'm thinking, I think it's often the fear of that person. I've suggested, why, just go on 10 dates, and it rather than that, like, so it doesn't build too much. So they're not just putting on too much weight for the first date or two. And so if they just kind of think 10 dates, I mean, that might sound like a lot, but actually, in a sense, it can take the pressure off. Do you think that's foolish advice that
No,
I'm giving?
Jane, I think that's really
One of those
wise.
people,
I wish I was your friend.
one of those women are now married, like one of that woman, they're now married. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And look,
the other ones are still going out.
That's so important though, isn't it? Like, again, it depends. Some of us are just calm in the face of everything. Do you know what I mean? We had friends for a time. We've lost some contact with them. He was a diplomat. He'd lived in war-torn countries. He could walk into places with gunfire going off and it didn't affect him. I know other people for whom just the smallest thing can be really kind of distressing. How reactive we are and how we react to things is a deeply physiological and personal thing. If you're a person who struggles a bit with anxiety or fear or those kinds of things, these things can be it can feel almost crippling entering into this space. So anything that you can do to lower the pressure a bit and the intensity and give you as much freedom as you can to walk into those spaces, I think that's really healthy.
Yeah, and what you were saying earlier, just in terms of, this was, I guess, once a couple are going out, but even just in terms of going on, dates, actually what you would do in normal life. So go for a walk together or things like that. So you're not thinking, for some people, actually just sitting opposite each other at a cafe is really stress inducing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing an activity together, for some people, that's just much more relaxing and they'll be more themselves. Yeah, and enjoy it more. Okay, would getting into a Christian relationship and wanting to date for a few years, then get married, a wrong view to have? Or should you only start dating when you think you're ready to get married? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you, I'm not saying enter into a relationship because you need to sort out in the first 3 months whether you're going to get married or not. I think relationships do take time and it takes a while. But if you think I'm actually not interested in getting married now, I'm not interested in getting married for the next few years, I'm not sure that it's super helpful for you to enter into the relationship at that point in time.
Yeah. Okay. Is it okay for two new Christians to start dating, or should they? I guess this couple are dating because it says, or should we break up first and date when we are mature enough to date?
Yeah, I mean,
it's a lovely question.
It is such. I think the question, in a sense, reveals some of your heart about it and wisdom. So that's really good. I mean, I think, again, people who know you in your context are much better placed to answer that question. I think it could be healthy and helpful, or it could be that for each of you, the Christian thing's so new that it's been confused with the dating thing. And I don't know how to answer that question for you. Find some people you trust in your context and ask the question.
Yeah. You touched on this a bit in your talk, but is there such a thing as spending too much time with the person you're dating, if you're still spending time with family and friends as well as having time alone? So I guess maybe they heard what you said in the talk and they're
Yeah.
following it up. So yeah, is there such a thing as spending too much time with the person you're dating? If you're also spending
Spending time
time
with,
with
yeah,
other
yeah, yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think
yeah.
um, it's always possible to spend too much time with the person that you're dating. It's actually possible to spend too much time with the person you're married to, I would say.
And you
You
mentioned in
know,
the talk about potentially, okay, well, you might be dating someone, but we choose not to have contact on Thursday and Tuesday or whatever
yeah,
it might be. Yeah.
yeah. Or just learning how to, like, I mean, for Kathy, we've been married for a long time now, but our life is full. We both have, we have jobs, we have other friendships outside of home. We're both involved in ministries in our church. Some of those together, some of those are independent of each other. We have responsibilities in all sorts of different places. Healthy relationships are able to come together and enjoy time together, and then do things apart from each other. And the answer to that question is, is it possible? Yes, it is. How you answer that question for yourself is whether you're feeling kind of stifled or stuck, or whether you're feeling drawn into this space and you can't find a healthy balance. You know,
Mm. Um, this touches a little bit on something that you touched on just before. When should we consider choosing to be single for the sake of the kingdom of God?
yeah. I mean, the two Matthew 19, 1 Corinthians 7 are kind of the two places that speak about singleness. Jesus says very clearly, some have been made eunuchs by men, some have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom, etc., etc. But this is only for those who can receive this saying. When when do you do that? If you feel convicted by the scriptures, by God's work in your life, that singleness is a good thing for you and good for the sake of the gospel, then I'm saying, great, make that commitment, do that. Um, I know a number of friends who've done that and then 10, 15, 20 years later decided, or God brought along an opportunity where marriage seemed appropriate, and they decided for good reasons that that was the appropriate thing to do at
Yes,
that
you
point
don't
in
have to feel
time.
guilty about
So I don't,
actually,
when
changing.
Paul says marriage is good and singleness is better, he genuinely means singleness is better. There are real things about singleness that are better, but he says both are gifts from God. And so it's not like when you're choosing one, you're completely failing by not choosing the other. And so I want to say there's a lot of freedom in that space.
Yeah, I have a lot of practical freedom that my married friends, colleagues don't have
Yeah.
by the very fact that they're married. Responsibilities that you have that I don't have because I don't have a spouse, I don't have children, and that is very freeing in a practical
Oh,
sense.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And it means that
so
you
it
are
makes sense of
involved
what
in all
Paul's
sorts of
saying.
different ways
Yeah,
than I am in different
yeah,
spaces and relationships and
yeah,
ministries. So,
different
yeah.
ministries. Yeah. Um, these next group of questions are to do with sexuality. So, is dating a non binary person a sin, even if their sex is male, but they don't identify as anything in particular?
Um, I don't think that, sorry, I don't think automatically that dating them, I'm presuming that you're a woman. I'm presuming that they're male sexually, even though they don't identify in any particular way. I don't think it's necessarily sinful to enter into that relationship. But I would say I would want to know an awful lot of things before I ever said yes to something like that. And I'd particularly want to know that is, I know people who are Christians who love Jesus, who experience same sex attraction. I know people who are deeply committed to Jesus and who experience some confusion emotionally and personally about sexual attraction and where they're at and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I think for some of them, they have, by the grace of God, worked out how to hold those things together in a way that they're really godly and wise and thoughtful. But I would want to know whether their decision to be non-binary, for example, to not identify, etc., 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 if that was from a kind of considered position about what I think is true or what's biblical or whatever, I would have deep concerns about whether someone had actually read the Bible and was acting Christianly.
Yeah, because they're separating gender from biological sex at
sex.
that point, and
Correct.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is what our culture does, but it is not what the
I
Bible
don't think the
does.
Bible does that.
No.
Yeah.
Is experimenting with the same sex a sin? Can I, as a woman, date a woman but not pursue it further? What does God say about about same-sex dating? Is it wrong?
Yes. Um, if you're asking me, does the Bible explicitly have a command same-sex dating is wrong? It doesn't. Do I think that same-sex dating is ruled out by the rest of what the Bible says? I think it is. Um, if by dating you mean some sort of um, intimacy that's heading towards marriage and sexual engagement with each other, I would say don't even go near that.
Or exclusive relationship, yeah.
Absolutely.
Intimacy,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the Bible is saying no to same-sex
Yeah.
marriage, and so
Absolutely.
no to
No
same-sex
same-sex
dating.
dating as well.
Yeah.
And I think like sorry. I understand that in a broader world, people are going to disagree with me very strongly about that for different reasons. But for me, where the Bible in Genesis 1 2 talks about our createdness and the nature of our being created male and female for the purpose of marriage, and the way that the whole rest of the Bible speaks about same sex attraction and other things, speaks to me that there is a right way of honoring God with this. In a disordered world, some Christians do experience things like same sex attraction, so I don't want to demonize that. But I want to say that same sex sexual behavior is ruled out completely by the scriptures.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, and it might be that someone is struggling with issues of emotional dependency, and so they, so their relationship with someone of the same sex has become just actually
Yeah.
really unhealthy and ungodly, and so they're wanting something more intimate than what a regular, healthy, godly relationship of the same sex
Yep.
should be. So, getting help for that sort of thing about why
Yeah.
the emotional dependency issues.
Yeah.
Um, and just continuing on with same sex attraction, would you encourage someone who is same sex attracted to get married to someone of the opposite sex? What would you say to someone who is same sex attracted who wanted to date someone of the opposite sex and get married?
Um, I know of circumstances where that's happened and been helpful and healthy. I think it could also be not wise. I think that for the person who is, if you think that um, marriage to someone of the opposite sex is going to kind of fix or cure you or whatever, I really want to encourage you not to go there. I don't think that's the solution, and I don't think it's going to solve it. I think if you do not feel any sexual attraction at all to the other person, because if you get married, the Bible's actually calling you to enter into a sexual relationship with that person and honor them and care and protect them in that space as well as others. I think that has implications, and so I wouldn't want to go there. But I've heard stories and testimonies from same-sex attracted people who have worked through some of those issues, who have ended up feeling attraction sometimes to both genders, have worked out how to be honest with that person as they've entered into the relationship and where it's worked out.
That's a really key thing, isn't it? Not keeping it a secret.
Really
actually
important
being honest.
that it's part
Yeah.
and fairly early on that it's upfront and real in the relationship.
Yeah. And there's some well-known Christians who have chosen to remain single. They don't think they're able, they haven't been
Absolutely.
attracted enough to the opposite sex to get married.
Yep.
But then there's others who have chosen to get married,
Yep.
feel enough attraction anyway to their particular spouse to do that. Yeah. What does God think about being in a polyamorous relationship?
Yeah.
So consensual sex with multiple partners. If if
Yep.
someone doesn't know that, different to polygamy in one sense.
It is. It's
not a marriage.
Also known as an open.
Yeah.
There are segments within our society who would then live together, maybe as 3 or 4 people, where they're all sexually engaged with each other at the same time, all that kind of stuff.
Or at one of my friends, her brother would regularly visit a married couple's home and have sex with the wife, and the husband was okay with that.
Yeah.
So that's sort of it's all consensual.
Yeah. I would say it's completely inappropriate. The fact that we consensual is not the same thing as right in God's eyes. We can decide all sorts of things. I can decide to go in and bow down to the idol because I don't really think that it's an idol or whatever. But God prohibits certain practices and behaviors and other things, even if we think that they're okay, or even if we can find reasons to excuse them. And I think that in the sexual space, any kind of polyamorous relationship is ruled out completely by what the Bible teaches about who we are and what God wants for us.
If you have questions about polygamy, we actually have a talk on the Priscilla and Aquila website that Philip Jensen gave a couple of years ago, if you're wanting to look at that. But that's slightly different to polyamorous. This goes back to same-sex, but I think that they're talking about someone who maybe is not a Christian. How can I show love and be supportive of a close friend who is in the same-sex relationship? So I'm assuming they're talking, their close friend is someone who is not a Christian.
Yeah. I mean, if your close friend is not Christian, I think that if they were Christian, I think you have an obligation to gently but graciously say, I don't think this is what God wants for you biblically, and I want to encourage you to end that relationship. But they may decide to stay in the relationship and reject God at that point in time. I don't think that's a reason to cut off friendship from them. In terms of loving the same-sex attracted friend, I think you want to start by sharing the gospel. And the starting point of the gospel is not you need to stop being same-sex attracted. The starting point of the gospel is that we're sinful and we're all broken. And for same-sex attracted people, just like for heterosexually attracted people and whatever, our lives are about, like, the world keeps pushing us into this space where sex becomes our identity.
Yeah.
It's actually, humanly speaking, as people, there's so much to us, and we're so complex and broken and all. There's so much of life to live. Share life with them. If they're same-sex attracted, it's okay to have dinner with them, to hang out with them, share what you believe and why you believe it. Try to be honest and real with them and look for opportunities to invite them into a relationship with God.
Yeah, our sexuality is not our identity. It's whether we're in Christ or out of Christ. Yeah. And we could end up just sounding like moralism.
Absolutely.
Without grace. A couple is marrying at my church after only dating a few months. I feel a bit uncomfortable about it. What helpful questions would you ask them? Is there such a, and there's a couple of related questions to this. Is there such a thing as dating too quickly?
I feel like in some ways I've touched on some of this already, Jane, like talking about the limerence thing, talking about the have you had a good fight thing. But as a friend coming in from the outside.
And I think some people feel like it's happened because of lockdown as well. But I think it normally comes up in Christian circles, that other people think, oh, you've only been dating a couple of months. Yeah.
I think it's okay to gently come alongside your friend and say, this feels like it's really quick. And I'm really concerned for these reasons. Like, be willing to kind of, I'm not sure that you know each other well enough yet. You haven't experienced a lot of life. It's been abnormal life as well with lockdown and stuff. I'm wondering whether it actually would be wise to give it a bit more time before you make this decision with each other.
I think sometimes also just if you're on the receiving end of that, like often the person doesn't want to hear it.
Absolutely.
And so if you're on the receiving end of that, what are some words of wisdom on how to receive that advice?
Yeah, I think, again, first of all, learning how to listen and respect someone's intention. That is, rarely will someone have done that because they're on a power trip and they want to control your life and they want to stop you dating.
Like, or they're jealous, or
they're jealous,
or
whatever
it is,
or those things are possible.
Yeah.
But if the person is genuinely expressing it out of some concern, listen to them, respect their opinion, evaluate what they've got to say. They may have some wisdom to share that it's worth listening to for you. And actually, if them saying something makes you so anxious and uptight that all you can do is push them away or get angry at them or whatever else, that makes me slightly concerned about the nature of the relationship.
Yeah. One of my friends decided to get engaged to someone and they hadn't gone out at all. They had been friends for quite a long time, but they hadn't gone out at all. And they said, oh, we know this is a shock. to some of you. So we would, like to hear your wisdom, and so your any concerns that you have. So I shared my concerns with my friend, and they remained calm. They didn't get defensive or anything, but it was very, very clear that they did not want to hear any feedback at all, because they emotionally they had made a decision. So,
Yeah.
but you never know what some people will think and
Which again
take
is
on
like,
board. Yeah,
it's worth, if you're concerned, out of love, say something, but realize it's not your it's not your decision either, and you can't. They're an adult, so you can't force the outcome, right? So it's a matter of being healthy and wise in relationship again.
Any advice on successfully, I like this, on successfully engaging with a Christian about their non-Christian boyfriend, girlfriend? How do we minister in these
Yeah.
situations?
So
All too common, isn't it? Yeah.
again, successfully
Yes.
is genuinely in the hands of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's required is a conviction from God that this is not a healthy thing, and then I'm going to end it. Now, in the Bible, all sorts of convictions come about because someone else is brave enough to say, do you think this is wise? Do you think this is what God would want for you? So the answer is, if you come in determined that if you don't break them up, you've failed, then you're going to come in with all the wrong motives, and you're going to come in putting emotional pressure on people and stuff in ways that are just going to make the relationship bad. If you come in, I love you, here's what I want. I think the Bible says, I don't think this is good for you. I really want you to consider that. That is the best that you can do. But you have to also entrust them to God, and again, let them make their own decision.
And encourage them to be trusting God, and because sometimes, or often, it will be, oh, but no Christian has asked me out, or yeah,
That's right.
like that, yeah.
Yep.
One flesh is more than just sex. What else does it encompass?
Yeah, it's a really good question. For me, Ephesians 5 has been really significant there. So I talked about that a bit in the talk, but where um, uh, there's this strange phrase where Paul says, does a man ignore his own body? Does he not feed it and care for it? Like, to do damage to yourself, um, while that happens sometimes in our world, it's acknowledged that that's not a healthy place to be. Um, and the one flesh point at that point is a description of the fact that um, your spouse's good is also your good, if I can put it like that. So, what causes them to grow and delight in God and flourish as a person and act with godliness and stuff, that's not just for their good, it's also for your good. And so, the one flesh actually implies that your lives have been joined together in a way that your life and goods and stuff are shared. Now, that doesn't mean that you become one person, you're still two individuals, but there's a kind of uniting of those things. And I think that that has really, like, for example, if you enter into arguments and you think that arguments are all about winning and losing, then automatically with your spouse, you either win and they lose, or you lose and they win. But if they're your flesh, then their loss is in some ways your loss as well. So respecting that how I do relationship with this person actually needs to respect their autonomy as a person and respect their giftedness and seek their good. That one fleshness is a guard that says that I want to treat them in a way that I would really want to be treated myself, and that helps them to grow and develop as a person. And I think that that's a really, actually, the more I have reflected on that idea, the more I have been struck about the privilege, but also the enormous weight of the reality of marriage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does God, you touched on this in your talk a bit, but this question came after the talk. So it might be that you want to refer the person back to listening to the talk or say some more. What does God say about dating in high school?
Yeah, I mean, God doesn't say anything about dating in high school. The Bible doesn't say anything at all.
Biblical
So the
principles.
wisdom that I offered was just thinking about who you are and where you are in life. If dating leads to marriage and you're not legally allowed to be married till you're 18, starting to date at 13 or 14 in and of itself, you're talking about the next at least 5 or 6 years before marriage is even on the cards. And entering into a relationship of exclusivity that's going to cause lots of sexual temptation and likely to be unhealthy for you in a lot of ways, I would just say, I would really encourage you not to do that, to step away.
Just enjoy your
Just
teenage years.
absolutely.
Yeah, and some
Now,
people, I mean, I know like who've grown up in Christian homes, their parents have said to them, we're not allowing you to date until after you leave school.
yeah,
And that they've looked back, and even though they were frustrated at the time and annoyed with their parents, some of them, they actually, oh, that was actually really
so
freeing because in a sense, I didn't make
it
stupid
took it off the
mistakes.
table,
I,
and
yeah, like
yeah,
they took that responsibility for me in a
yeah,
sense, yeah, which was helpful for
yeah.
me as a
Absolutely. And
teenager.
now, not all
Yeah.
teenagers have that level of wisdom or insight either, right? So, I've seen parents who, you know, lay down rules like that or kind of guidelines, and children have just gone, no way in the world I'm listening to you. And look, I want to just say that there is a reality at sometimes about being teenagers where we make really foolish decisions because massive changes are happening internally, personally, identity wise. There's
Hormonally in our brains.
so much going
Can't always
on.
see the consequences
No,
for things. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so being gracious and thoughtful and wise as parents in those circumstances is all important. But I want to say to you, particularly in your younger years as a teenager, be very careful about dating. And again, get some wisdom from people who know you about your maturity levels and about whether this is really a good idea. And if you do choose to date still, but you want to honor Jesus and that's important to you, make sure there are safeguards in place. Make sure that you do your relationship in public spaces. Don't spend lots of time privately with each other. Be thoughtful about how you engage with each other.
Paul, how should a church deal with sexual assault allegations?
Yeah. Um, uh, there is so much going on in this question. I'm going to assume that by allegations, there's been some sort of public allegation made about inappropriate behaviour. And the answer to that is, um, I feel like I can answer from my own denomination's perspective. So we have a whole bunch of kind of guidelines and rules in place. We have a professional standards unit, um, and where it's actually appropriate to report it. It's really important to bring people probably from outside the congregation in. It's not the congregation's job to investigate the truth or falsehood of the allegation. So if someone brings the allegation, our first point of call would be to believe them and let the allegation stand, and then try and let people who are trained in this come in from the outside in order to ascertain whether what's taken place and what's appropriate in that context. Um, I think I I would suggest that wherever allegations have been made, it would be appropriate for that person to stand aside from any kind of leadership role or ministry while during the time that those allegations are being investigated. Like we ought to do everything that we can to make sure that due process is followed, that allegations are taken with utmost seriousness, and where anything is proven or things take place that ought to be dealt with are dealt with completely above board and with no sweeping things under the carpet. I think those would be really important principles. But I think in different denominations, exactly what those rules are and what the organisations are, and go and find someone who actually has that information in your church context or whatever, and engage properly with that information.
Yeah, so it's really important that someone is familiar with what their denomination, what their protocol is, what their process
Absolutely.
is.
Yep.
And then if you've got a completely independent church, that's when, in terms of the governance of that church, needs to work something out if they haven't
Yeah,
already. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
And if there are like sexual assault allegations that have been brought up and that's not been treated appropriately, it is likely that it's very appropriate for police or family and community services and other people to be involved and engaged in that process. So, yeah, don't let people just sweep it under the carpet or ignore
yeah, yeah. Um, is it wise to start dating during lockdown, even if it's someone I've known for a long time?
it. I think it could be totally appropriate and okay.
Can women take initiative when guys are too timid or rather want to be led by women in their relationships? So, I mean, like one of the questions you answered on the night, but yeah,
Yeah, I want to say that um, the world's not kind of neat and tidy, right? And I think it's okay for a woman to express, I am interested in. It's okay. So I don't have a problem with that particularly, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And our last question, fantastic question and a great question to end with. How can we keep God at the center of our relationships? How can we encourage our boyfriend or girlfriend to keep living for Him?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. You know how we talked about sense of self before? I really think a big part of your sense of self comes from your relationship with God and your belief in His truth. So the first step is actually not what you do for them, but what this is going to, it sounds kind of selfish and really not Christian, right? But actually, you working at your own Christian growth is a really significant thing that you bring to the relationship, I think. I think, secondly, as you do life together, do it Christianly. That can mean like a formal reading of the Bible thing or making sure you pray about stuff together. But I think it unfolds more just in Christian conversation. Like, do you talk about what you've been learning in church, or do you talk about, oh, that thing happened and I'm thinking about this from a Christian perspective? What's your thoughts about it? What do you think the Bible has to say about that? Like, make it part of your life and your conversation and the way you do stuff. I just think that's really, really important. And as a couple, make commitments to turn up at church every week and turn up at church ready to serve others, not just to be kind of there as you. Keep that outward looking focus as part of your relationship, and keep reading the word. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. I hope you've enjoyed or you found it helpful what Paul's been sharing with us over these last couple of hours now. It's been a while, but there are a lot of things that were touched on, and hopefully also if you did find it helpful that you can share this resource with other people. Um, Thank you so much for being with us at the Priscilla and Aquila Centre. There's lots of other resources on our website and also on the Moore College website generally. If there's any topics that you want us as the Priscilla and Aquila Centre to address, please contact me at Moore College. And it might be that we choose to do that as an interview or as a seminar or at our annual conference. It might be also that it's something that our Ethics Centre, the Centre for Christian Living, could do. But yeah, hopefully we'll see you back at Moore College sometime soon. Thanks very much for being with us today. Goodbye.